Hi, everybody, and welcome to Friday Night Flock Talk. I'm Robin Sullivan of the Leather Elves, and I want to welcome you all. It's a warm one out there everywhere. We're not so bad here in Maine. It's only 84, I think it was. I looked at before we started, but the it's warm for Maine. I'm going to say that. So I've got to do my usual announcements. You can follow us. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's a lot of different ways to get the live stream. We have been doing them every other week. This next week, we're going to do one right after this one. So it's a little bit different, and the schedule's been changing a little bit. But Nick has been gracious enough to hang in with me and do it when we can. Tonight, well, actually, there's one thing I do need to explain first. We've got a 40% off Beat the Heat sale. So it was warm, and I thought everybody kind of needed a break. So tonight, we're announcing we've got a sale that's valid until midnight on August the 1st. And the code is HOT, HOT. So at checkout, you want to enter HOT because we know you all are. So now that we've said that, I really am excited to introduce you to my guest tonight. This gentleman is I guess the technical term is content creator. It sounds so important. It's wonderful. But we've got Zeb Ernest with us. Zeb is a content creator, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with his work. Hey, Zeb, how's it going?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
And you've got your co-host there,
Yeah, this is Lady. Lady is my favorite bird out of all the years I've been around birds. She's the queen.
but we're not going to tell those other birds, your other birds that,
Oh, they
of
know.
course.
They know. No secrets.
They do. I was saying to Zeb, you guys, before we signed on, that I think of Eclectus as the divas of the parrot world. They're just, I mean, they're pretty, they can be chill, they can be fun, but there's just that elegance about them. I'm not sure what it is. And she's going to show us her backside there, as I'd say that she's elegant. Typical parrot behavior. Um, So when Zeb and I were talking about what we were gonna talk about, we talked about we could do. I mean, we could both. Either one of us could do an hour on behavior, an hour on enrichment, an hour on how to feed your bird, how to do it right. But we kind of came to the conclusion that we wanted to talk about the journey. So Zeb, let's go back to the beginning. How do you
Okay.
become? How do you become who you are?
Oh, I mean, it started from childhood, the animal thing, but I didn't know it was going to be birds. So I guess we're going way back. I grew up in Montana, had 14 acres. My parents were really into horses, but my dad bred and showed rabbits. So I grew up in 4-H, and animal care was just my default, right? I'm old enough where I didn't have the internet. I didn't even have cable TV. I had animals, and I went outside. So I did have some experience with pigeons multiple times, both as a young kid and as a teenager. But the rule of my house was my mom said you can have as many animals as you want when you move out and live on your own. To her, the animals belonged outside. So my first year of college, I discovered aquariums. One aquarium turned into 8 or 15 in the dorm room. I got a job at the local pet store working with fish. I actually dropped out of college after that because I said, this is all I want to do. And that is when I was introduced to parrots.
So the pet store thing, I think a lot of us grew up that way, that it was, I you could go to the pet store and you could look at all the cool different animals and then, maybe you got one or two, but I feel like all of us kind of broke out and when I'm on my own, I'm going to have as many animals as I want, and I honestly think that's kind of what happened to a lot of us. But so Bert, you said you had some pigeons, or you had some experience with pigeons, and did you what kind of work did you do with them?
A pigeon befriended my brother and followed him home. His name was Baldy, and then he became my buddy. He lived underneath the trough where like the goats and sheep would be fed. I always thought it was hilarious because I'd go out there to visit him, and he'd put his wing out and he'd tap my feet. He'd kind of defend his nest. I thought he was the coolest guy in the world. Um, and then I would say probably middle school, I met a nice neighbor. Again, this is in the country, so neighbor means within 5 miles. And
Mhm.
he bred pigeons, and he was really passionate about getting young boys involved in aviculture. I didn't even know what that word was, but I remember how nice he was. I also remember, like, when my father was showing rabbits, the state fair, there was a separate building where all the birds would be. And, everybody was always so nice to me as a youngster walking around because I was so interested in the birds. It was similar to what my dad did, but different enough that I thought it could be my own. So I would say I
Yeah.
was imprinted on birds. But as a teenager, my dad helped me build an aviary in between two sheds. I got a couple groups of pigeons, which quickly became way too many pigeons. And that nice man was nice enough to take them all back once I had gotten all my friends into pigeons, and we were all swimming in little baby pigeons.
It's
True story.
yeah,
I
and
still.
I think that's what happens is we get that whole, okay, I'm going to get one. And we joke around, right? In aviculture, we joke about, oh, I'm just going to have one bird and you can't, they're like Lay's potato chips. You can't have just one. But I think it's, for the most part, everyone I mean, when I had a kike and it was a solo bird, but I think honestly, it's that this is the coolest thing ever. These are amazing animals. I want to live with them. I want to live with more. And I think that's, where we end up, and that's what happens.
Yeah. I love taking care of things. Like I love fish tanks, I love reptiles, but with birds it's different because there's somebody in there. The way they interact with you, the way they bond with you or just pick you. I think that's probably the most special thing is that they pick you.
Yeah. So, you started out, you got the pigeons, you went to college, you got the fish. Um, how do you get to, your Zeb Ernest, you've got a family, you've got an amazing social media presence. How do you get from there to there? How does that happen?
Well, when I was in the first pet store, I decided that's what I wanted out of my life. Um, but I knew that I needed experience, and so I wanted to work for everybody so that I could one day have my own store. So I intentionally left my college town. I moved to Las Vegas. I worked for the big box stores, which is PetSmart and Petco. I worked for a franchise. I also have experience in the locally owned pet stores. And in that time, you get to be a part of things like local bird clubs. Working in
Mhm.
pet stores, people dump birds off, sometimes willing or unwilling. Sometimes you find a box at the front door when you go to open the store. So I started taking in birds, rehoming birds. Um, I would say out of the birds I've owned, probably around 60 birds like I've owned over the years, but out of birds that I've taken in to rehome, that number's
Mhm.
over 100. Um,
Yeah.
that happened living in a big place like Las Vegas. That doesn't happen so much in the other states that I lived in. So I got a lot of experience. I learned a lot that way, and I was really active on like forums and things like that. And I always wanted to put myself out there, but for whatever reason, I didn't until roughly 2 years ago. Um, I would say before you can become, if you want to say anything, like I'm just a bird person, right? Like
Right.
it's observation, it's seeing how people are because the culture of aviculture is some prime people watching. Yeah.
It's very true. It's so true. And I love your on your Facebook page, it says for weird people, which most of us is it which most of us are.
Yeah.
You know, it's so true, and and I think we pride ourselves on that, quite honestly. And it's but there's the thing I like about aviculture is that yes, there are a multitude of personalities, and there's different ways of doing things. Everybody's got, well, no, this is the best way, that's the best way, but when it comes right down to it, we're kind of willing to stick up for one another that, yeah, I have birds and so does she, and that's how that goes. And I think that's what I like. And when you talked about observation, it's such a critical skill because not only are you, I mean, yeah, people watching. I remember, I'll tell you my old story. When I was very young, we used to take my Nana to the grocery store on Friday afternoons. And my mom and I would always finish first, and we'd go out and sit in the car and wait for Nan to come out. And we'd watch people and we'd make up stories about their lives. Oh, that one's, got this going on, and that one's got this going on. And I think it's the same, that kind of observation skill has come in so handy for me later in life working with animals, and especially birds, because the more you pay attention, the more you get.
Mm, that's true.
uh,
I think what's interesting about bird people is it's predictable. I haven't done it as long as many people have. I understand that, but there's a lot of similarities between aquarists or herpers. And with bird people, it's interesting because they seem to start in a couple different groups and they go through these motions. And generally, people don't stay in one group, they tend to move from one area to the next. So it's really interesting when you see somebody who is new kind of recognize what part of their journey they're in. And then over the years, especially if you get to know them, you watch as that develops and changes ultimately.
Yeah. And I think that's true. I think it's, and the other thing I like to see happen, and it doesn't happen all the time, is when people become more open to the whole picture of aviculture, that it's not just that segment. And so I have this dream that someday I'm going to write a book, and it's going to be called the aviculture, like a giant spider, only not as yucky, because I feel like we have all these different legs of the community, and we're going to fall over if we don't all work together. If one goes
Yeah.
away, it just doesn't work. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we really need to think about, and we need to be we don't have to agree. It's the same as when you go to that cocktail party and somebody starts talking politics, and
Yeah.
we don't have to agree, but let's discuss. We've got some comments here. I know Nancy Forrester says she's 85 and she's been working with unwanted parrots for 30 years, the happiest years of her life. um, Kathy says today her mail cleaner notified her there was a wasp inside the house, so the flock got stuck to her shoulder. I mean, it's that give and take in that relationship. And it's really quite interesting how people interact with the other segments of the community. So now you have an interesting position. You're the content creator, and you've got birds yourself. So you're kind of like between segments of the community. Um, Suggestions for how people can interact with the other segments of the community. What do you think?
Yeah, so it is interesting. I think some people have expectations of me that I'm going to side with one or the other, and I typically don't. I'm very middle of the road in a lot of things.
Mhm.
Um, and it's a generational thing too. I do want to say that, you know, when I started with birds, I mean, it was basically 2000, 2001. All the materials you had were printed materials that were speaking towards what the past 20 or 30 years were about. And the 20 or 30 years after that, I don't think are comparable at all. Just the way information is given. You know, it used to be about bird clubs and published books, and now so much of it is social media and the internet. And the internet doesn't tell you the most correct answer, it tells you the most common answer. It's a lot of parroting. So
Right.
it's been very interesting to come up in this time when I first started, people were still willing to mentor. And I find that now a lot of our really valuable, knowledgeable people, they're pretty closed up because they're tired of getting beat up on the internet for sharing their perspective. Um, I can say, I'm going on a tangent here, I know.
That's okay.
When I started in a pet store, and the two people that were experienced with birds, it was the owner and her assistant. I'll be honest, they were a little bit of a gatekeeper into the world of birds. Even though they had birds and they sold bird supplies, and they did sell a couple birds here and there, they had some pretty radical ideas that you don't see anywhere else in other hobbies. You know, we're the only lifestyle or hobby that hates itself. I like to say it that way because, you know, we're mad that we have them, yet we love them. We're mad at the people that provide them for us, but yet we want them. It's a weird thing, and it really comes from, I believe, misinformation, especially repeating stories that at one time were true, but may not be the case now. Like, for example, it's 2023. Some birds are hard to find. And so there's this narrative that, um, you know, it's the pet industry that's causing all of our problems. And I actually very much disagree with that statement. It's a hot
Mhm.
topic, but
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, and I think about people I've known over the years in the industry and how they've evolved. And it's amazing. There was a woman that only did one, it was, I'm only going to do rescue. And this was back when it was just called rescue. There weren't any other names for it. And she only did rescue. And then she kind of morphed into being a breeder. And then she kind of got a store. And to watch her journey was so interesting because it was positive and people were willing to look at it positively. And I feel like the people who are most open, and I'm not going to say that don't support this segment, don't support that segment. I kind of play nice with everybody because I feel like we all have a place in this avicultural world. And I think it's the cooperation that needs to happen. That's one that you mentioned that, but before we went on, you guys, Zeb and I were talking about some things, and he mentioned Bird Gardens of Naples. Carrie Ellen is one of my favorite aviculturists in the whole world because she's open to what's best for this bird. What situation does this bird fit best in? And it's not, oh, it's got to be this, it's got to be that. And it may change over time. But I think, you know, you're right. I think that that gatekeeper piece that used to happen, people can get more information now. They can get that information and be careful getting it. I mean, you guys should only listen to Zeb on the internet and myself. No, that's not true. But just be careful where the information is coming from. And Sarah brings up a really good option for education, the AFA, ASA, OPA, say that 5 times fast, conference that's going to be in Dallas in September. So there's another good opportunity. But so to circle back around a little bit, you mentioned bird clubs, Zeb. And I think,
yeah,
bird clubs can be an amazing source of information. Um,
I agree.
but they're not out there as much anymore. Um,
It
I,
doesn't seem like
you
it.
know,
I joined a bird club in Las Vegas, and it was the most fun ever because, you know, back then I had a handful of birds, right? I think I had 8 when I started. And that's how I got to see a black palm cockatoo in person. I got to listen to veterinarians come and speak as guests. It was great, and it was just a social event. And social media is great, but it's also a little bit lonely. And I think we need to bring back more in person events.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's a matter of sharing the information with other people, and that's the thing because you know, I don't know about you, but when I'm working with people, when I'm doing live streams, when I'm consulting, I'm still learning though because you have Lady the eclectus, but Lady may be different from somebody else's or is different. I'm not going to say maybe is different from somebody else's eclectus, and maybe there's something though that could work across settings. I mean,
Yeah,
don't you find that dialogue really helps in providing good care?
absolutely. I talk to a number of people on the phone weekly, and I bounce back and forth. So it's not like I get one topic and this is the ultimate truth. I question myself and I try it, and then I run into something, and then I ask them, and you might get clarification, or you might get somebody else, and you talk about another way to do things. I'm constantly questioning like my bird care personally, and there's great experiences out there. It's even though it's a niche, it's so big, nobody will master it. And I don't think anybody will master even a corner of it in their lifetime, which means we really need each other so that we can, get as much of that goodness as we can.
Right. And I mean, we talk about one of the terms that gets thrown around a lot in the industry is best practices. In any industry, best practices, best practices. Well, I am a firm believer in best practices. Um, but what does that mean for you? What does that mean in your setting? And I'm sure when you're talking to these people and when I'm consulting, it's got to work for that person. And I mean, have you experienced people trying to tell you, no, Zeb, this is how it's supposed to be done?
Oh, sure. In the beginning, when I would just be an active person, say on Facebook, you would say something and you would get attacked by somebody, and they wouldn't know who you are and what your experience was. And it put you in a position where you don't really want to participate. I jokingly say somebody who's had a cockatiel for 2 years is telling somebody who has macaws for decades how they're mistreating their macaw. So you do have to take things with a grain of salt. And, there's positive intent with what people are doing, but um, I also know that I probably am doing something wrong. I also think that there's different capabilities for everybody at different times in their life. I live in Florida now, but for the most part, I've always lived in winter states. So having outdoor aviaries and sunlight for my birds was only an option for 3 months out of the year. So it's an issue of, what can you do? What are your finances? What's your family like? What's your schedule? I think birds can be for everybody. That doesn't mean that, say a Moluccan cockatoo is for everybody. But there's a level to which everybody can get involved.
Absolutely. And I think, that's a really important point, that different family structures, different houses. I always tell people, they'll say, well, should I is a conure a loud bird? Well, it can be. It definitely can be. And for me, that noise is almost as bad as the screaming cockatoo. But that's me. And so when you go and you talk to people about it, well, yeah, I think it would work. I think it would be great. But do you live in an apartment? Do you live in a house that's out in the country? And I think that's something that we as people who are counseling, if you will, or mentoring people, one of the things that we need to be aware of is it doesn't work in every setting. It doesn't work in every family structure. You and I talked a little bit when we were discussing the live stream itself about how family dynamics aren't the death knell for having birds. I mean,
Are or aren't?
are not that
No, I
having a
don't.
family is not. Yeah.
No, absolutely
So
not.
tell
Go
me
ahead.
a little bit of, or tell the listeners a little bit about, if you don't mind, your experience with family and birds.
Oh boy, how much time do we have on the clock? Uh, it's very common. You hear people saying things like, "We're having a baby. I'm not sure I can keep my bird." And I, when I started, was one of those people that would say it would never happen, never in a million years. And then something happened to me. So I am raising 4 children with birds. They range from 14 to 4 months old. But our middle child was born disabled, and we didn't know. So it was a surprise on his birthday that he had Down syndrome. And he also has autism with a slew of difficult medical conditions. And we went through a phase where the doctors were really pushing me to get rid of my birds because they felt that it would be detrimental to his health. And so when I say I've had about 50 birds personally, it's because I had an original flock of birds that I had adopted, and I had to scale back when he was born because that first year with him was incredibly intense with surgeries and hospital stays, much of it out of state. Um, and I regret it. It ended up not being the right choice. I did what any parent thought they had to do. So I'm really sympathetic to people when they say, "Hey, I'm going through life change." I mean, I'm sure all of us can relate. I have a number of birds that came from a death or from a terminal illness or from some difficulty. And I find the birds are actually incredibly adaptive. But the one thing that has never actually been a problem is the birds have never been a threat to a child. They've never been the problem. It was the mentality of me thinking I couldn't or somebody else thinking they couldn't. I actually believe that if you're dedicated, you can. And any short term problems you might have in the long run, it'll be better for the bird to stay with you rather than make a change. But if you make a change, your bird will probably be all right as long as you make the right choice and find the right home.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think, we need to be aware that there may be some challenges that people just personally can't. If I need to rehome a bird, or I need to change my situation, and that's okay too. I absolutely think it's doable. I think, like you say, the birds are very adaptive. But I also think that if a situation comes up as a community, we need to also be aware that sometimes that change does have to happen. And, you see a lot on Facebook, on social media, people, you know, shaming because somebody has to make a change. And I think that's something we as a community have to be aware of. And I appreciate your sharing that story. Kathy says the same, thank you for sharing. But I think too, working through those changes, we've talked about it's a journey, right? We've talked about, your life journey and how things have progressed and how you got to how you got to where you are today. Um, but I think we need to be aware of working through those issues and working through those challenges. And sometimes, we need to look to our birds to help with that challenge. I mean, that's just my opinion. But I don't know about you, but I know that there have been many times in my life that animals have gotten me through the rough places. Um, and they seem,
It's my opinion that it is less about a person's ability and maybe even their confidence. It's because they hear from everywhere else. It's either they're afraid to speak up and talk about it because they'll get attacked, or because
Mhm.
so many people will tell them to go ahead and give up and they're not cut out for it. Because I'm not saying every one of us, but some of us have this complex where, well, nobody should have birds. It's terrible, but I can. I'm special, and I do not believe in any of that. I don't believe having a bird makes you special at all. It makes you interested in birds. That's great. Um, I just think we could be so much more supportive. And quite honestly, we could learn a lot from the aquarium hobbyists and the herpers because as a community, I think they're a lot less dysfunctional than the aviculturists. Sorry.
say it isn't. No, you're 100% right. And we talk about the community, and there is a community. There's no question about it. There is a community, but we are a completely dysfunctional family. I mean,
Well, it's odd
and
because
it's go ahead.
sorry, I actually think that we're the most giving, the most generous, the most. It's such an odd extreme because there just doesn't seem to be the middle ground. The kindest, most giving people I've met are bird people, and also the most judgmental and mean people are bird people.
It's it's very true. Okay, so Sarah says them's fighting words. I don't know, but she does agree. Um, so I think, I do think that it's a matter, and Deborah says that her parrot got her through her dad's death and her cancer diagnosis. And she was struggling emotionally and physically, that her birds got her through. And I think that's awesome, Deborah. And using that, I mean, I don't want to say use your animals, but use that energy, use that kind of give and take that we all have. And when you say that about being the most giving community and the most caring, most giving, most caring, and most judgmental, it's so true, because I think we get to that, like, no, I know this is the right way to do it. I know that, I want to give them the very best I possibly can, and this is it. And
Yeah.
there's no room, there's no wiggle room. It's I've been providing this wonderful life for my bird. He has everything he needs. And I'm gonna it's always the right way. My way is the right way, because look at how happy my bird is.
Mm.
But it's the same as saying that we should all live in the same house, we should all live with the same family, makeup. We should all that we would need to be more homogeneous, if you will, so that
Mm.
nothing's different. But our birds are all individuals, and I think that's something where the judgment does have to step aside. But
Well, it's another one of those
that,
dangers of the internet, right? So if we had clubs and we were together, you would have somebody who is, say, a breeder, and other people could see that that person cares and they do a great job, and you would have somebody who's a rescue and somebody who's a pet owner. But what tends to happen is people only seek information that, well, it's confirmation bias, right? So if you only go to places where people have one point of view, and you never get to experience, or quite honestly, you're not even allowed to discuss certain topics about birds in many groups.
yeah.
um, that works against us.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's a matter of, to say that one segment of the community is not, they're the bad guys. Well, there are bad guys in every single segment. I mean, let's be honest, whether you're talking pet owner, breeder, sanctuary, rehoming organization, zoo, whatever, you name it. You pick a place where birds are, and there's that bias. There's that, they're the bad guys. Well,
Yeah.
not always true. Maybe you've experienced the bad guys, and I'm sorry that you've experienced the bad guys, but every single segment has positive players in it. And I think I love watching. So years ago, I was doing a talk at Busch Gardens, and it was people who ran the education department and people who worked with the wolves. And I was talking about enrichment and behavior, and we one of the wolf staff made a suggestion, and the education staff was like, well, that's a great idea, and we never thought of it. And the reason they didn't think of it was because they were from a different segment. That wasn't their everyday go-to, but they were learning from that other piece of the puzzle, if you will. And I
Right.
think I love seeing, a breeder talking to someone from a rescue and talking about how they can make a bird's life better. And I mean, that's like, it's the little, like, light in the happens, when I
Yeah.
see that. Um, so yeah, people are chiming in quite a bit on the comments. We've got, Nancy says, thank you. She's in the process of choosing new homes for her family of birds. for when she's no longer able to care for them. Yeah, Nancy, I think, looking, she's going to keep her educational flock together as long as she can. But the fact that you're looking forward to that, Nancy, and that it's, I mean, that's a good decision. It's not, nobody's going to say, oh, that Nancy got rid of her birds. It's the right decision at this time in your life. So Heidi wants me to ask you more questions. She enjoys your perspective. Heidi, put some questions in there. We'll ask them. Um,
Well,
the
while that's loading, I do have a perspective I would like to share.
Sure.
I call myself a content creator because I'm just a regular person, right? I don't want to call myself a trainer or an expert or anything like that. I make content and I hope people enjoy it. But if I could have one mission statement, I think that everything can be fixed by having more good bird people. So some argue that we shouldn't have parrots because they live too long. Well, why not have mentors? Why not have people that we can pass those birds on to? When people have a problem, if we say that there's too many birds that need a home and rescue, the solution is more bird homes, more good people to take care of them. And quite honestly, it takes a lot to support all this. We need avian veterinarians. We need companies that make toys. We need companies that make food. We need companies that make cages. In the past 2 decades, we've lost so much product that used to be available. Just look at the American manufacturers of cages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
And
so true, and I think the industry as a whole. So Nancy says, where do we find those people? The more bird people, Nancy. I think we need to teach that next generation. I don't know. What do you think, Zeb?
yeah, I think we make them. I think that they're trying to become, but the hardest thing is somebody says, I'm interested in a bird, and the automatic response is, birds are terrible. Here's all the reasons you don't want a bird. And I get where that's coming from, right? In the 90s, and we are in a different position than we were before. I really firmly believe that. I think we're parroting a lot of stories that were emotional and they were good stories and they were relevant to the time, but we don't realize that 20 or 30 years has passed and we're not in the situation we once were. We probably did put too many birds into the hands of too many people that had too little information, because let's be honest, what was the boom of aviculture in the 70s and 80s, right? I mean, importation stopped in 1993. But back then, a bird was very cheap, and we thought that you didn't have to do much. But anyways, now people come in and they want to do right. They're willing to spend the money, and we talk them out of it. And those are people we're talking out of taking care of birds in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So Heidi says, how can we create a better local community to better care for birds and encourage more homes? Which I think you did just answer some of that. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that well, for me, the answer is content. It's making it accessible. It's being the person who's not going to be judgmental or attack someone. And I'm not perfect. There's been times where I'll go on a tangent and not everybody likes me. That's okay. But I think it's accessibility. I think it's, quite honestly, I think it's being an example. It's showing people, look, I have a full-time job. I have kids. I can do this. Why can't you do this if you want to? One of my favorite sayings is, you can do anything you want, you just can't do it all.
I think, Heidi, my opinion as far as that's concerned is education. I really, really, truly believe, and not education like this is how you do it. This is the only way to do it. It's like, hey, let's talk about different ways to do this. Let's, maybe we throw in a little science, and we, kind of keep some data, see what's going on, and get the next generation excited. Whether it's the little ones who just are in awe of the birds, or if it's the 10 and 11-year olds who are, I want to learn more. I want to see what I can do with this bird. I want to see how this works. And then I think the next step is the formal education. We've got people asking about veterinarians and how we get more veterinarians. I don't know, maybe we need to pay their vet school bills. I think that's the problem.
We
Yeah,
got we got
exactly.
customers to pay. Yeah, we gotta spend the money so that they can
Yeah,
make that into a living.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we talked too about the you talked about different cage manufacturers that have gone by the wayside. And I'm a small manufacturer, and I really encourage people to support those small manufacturers. Not just me, but people like Mighty Wings. And I know Melissa Davis is on tonight. Melissa makes toys for rescues and things. Those kind of support the smaller industry, because
Yeah.
they're kind of the hammock, if you will, that holds up what we need
Sure.
to do for our birds. So,
You know,
um,
Isabella, I saw in the comments she made a comment, and I really like that. I want to share a story. I think she said something to the fact of, when youth get involved, people turn them away. When I was 23, I don't remember, but I was an adult. I had a job in management. I was living on my own for at least 5 years. I wanted my first big bird. I already had 5 birds. Nobody would let me adopt a big bird because I didn't have big bird experience. They said that I wouldn't be able to do it. That's how I got Lady. I bought Lady. She's one of the few birds that I purchased, and I've had her for 19 years. And I think I do a pretty good job. I have 38 parrots in my care right now, and I was turned away. Even though I checked every box, I didn't have kids, even though that shouldn't be a thing because kids are great birds. I didn't smoke. I have no idea why I couldn't qualify to get a quote unquote big bird. And I wasn't trying to get the biggest of birds. I just wanted something bigger than a conure.
and that's the thing too, is that you know that's the old crazy circle that happens, is that or the vicious cycle that, well, you don't have big bird experience, so you can't have a bird. Okay, wait, and so those same people tell you that it's a starter bird. That's one of my favorite terms. It's a starter
Oh
bird.
yeah,
It's a starter
yeah.
bird. What is that? I mean, there are starter houses, but not a starter bird. I mean,
See, that's
they're
the.
all so.
Go ahead and finish. Sorry.
Well, I was gonna say they're all so amazing and so different. Like, I remember as a kid growing up with a budgie at my grandmother's house, and then you maybe you get bigger birds, maybe you don't, maybe you go smaller and you go to finches. But they're all so intriguing to me, and I think we need to be aware of that. And then I noticed here in the comments, Holly mentioned there's a really cool community of younger people with smaller parrots out there on the internet, and it's definitely true. I mean, there are different places online that where people there these communities are happening, and I think information like yours and the content that you create is helps to fuel that, and I think it's great.
Yeah. Thank you. I was going to say that the starter bird thing, that's the most common question I get is, what's a good beginner bird? What's a good first bird? And I cannot answer it. Even though I did a whole series and it was really just me giving my thoughts on different kinds of birds, I have no idea what your temperament is, your living situation. I don't know anything about you. Like, I'm good with macaws, but a lot of people aren't. I like scarlets. So I like difficult birds. If you have a bird that doesn't want to be held and is being nasty, that's the one I want to play with the most sometimes. But what if somebody wants to have just one bird? Are we asking them to have a cockatiel and then not have a cockatiel and work their way up? Like, they're not a video game. I actually think if you're the right person, you could get an eclectus or a hyacinth. That would be amazing. But you might just be great and dedicated to one bird. Not everybody needs a whole flock.
Right. I know, Melissa Davis is out there. Melissa has Zorro, and she does a fantastic job with Zorro. She takes him. She got up there. He rides her bike with her. She takes him out, and she is a it's one bird and it works for her. And we the starter bird term, it's just not a thing. It shouldn't be. And I love, when people will call or they'll message me on Facebook and they say, so what do you think, is what kind of bird should I get? I have no idea. Or do you think I can handle a bird? Don't know. Um, and then how do I what should I do? And again, I can give you real general stuff. I mean, Zeb, I'm sure you get these phone calls too. I can give you general information, but it's really that, the phrase study of one,
Mhm.
it's so true with birds. So
I mean, I've had the experience where there's a bird I had no interest in, but that individual is amazing and I love it. And I've also had the opposite where I've always wanted a such and such, and you go out and get it. And to be honest, it's not really that fun. And it's maybe not even that kind of bird, it's that bird, right? So it's
mhm.
like Lady is a great example. She is the perfect bird in every single way. I've never had another female Plectus, but the males, I've had, I think, five over the years, each one of them different. I wouldn't say
Mhm.
Eclectus are my favorite. Lady's my favorite.
Right, right, and that's the thing too. I mean, so like when I'm selling bird toys to people, they're like, "Do you have an eclectus toy?" Well, no, I don't. I have these toys, and here's you choose. Your birds, and that's the other thing I always tell people is, if somebody comes with a problem, or an issue that they're trying to work through, um, we've got to talk about your bird because you know them best, and like you said about Lady, Lady is an amazing bird, who happens to be an eclectus.
Yeah.
It's that.
Cockatoos is worst for that, right?
I well, Chris did say he started out with a cockatoo and failed, but he's doing better. 10 years later, he's doing better. Um, Nancy said she was given a hawk-headed parrot once, and what a rare gift. Is there sarcasm in that statement, Nancy? Because it, it's like saying, people from Boston are difficult. Okay, we are sometimes. I mean, let's be honest. But it's those kind of generalizations that that we make, and we do it about birds.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I think um, you've got a fan here. Lady and Zeb are the perfect duo. Isabella started out with a Quaker and failed, and now she has a macaw. So the Quaker wasn't a good starter bird. Should have gone right to the macaw. So
When
yeah,
I
it's
started, I was obsessed with cockatoos. I thought cockatoos were going to be everything, and I had them, and they're awesome. But guess what? Macaws are actually more my personality type.
I, it's for me. I had a Kaik, and he was not the typical Kaik. I used to joke that I had the only Kaik that wouldn't lay on his back, and that didn't hop. So, I mean, and we set ourselves up for that. We do I'm going to get this, and he's going to do all those things Zeb's birds do on the internet. It's,
I
and I think that's something that happens.
Yeah, ringnecks are having a moment on the internet. It used to be Bird Talk magazine was the precursor to, high prices and whatever bird was going to be really popular. But now it's content creators, right? And then I get so many questions from people that are like, "Oh, I want a ringneck because I want one that's goofy and talks," and I'm like, "That's not the typical ringneck."
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, because, and I think that's one of the things that I enjoy about your content, Zeb, is that it's real. That it's not the flashy, I can get your bird to do this in 2 sessions. I can, all the Indian ringnecks are like this. It's like, that's not true. Again, it's that individual piece, and you are realistic, and I think that's why, you have all these folks that think you're awesome, and I thank you for that honesty. Um,
Well, thanks.
so it
It's
it makes
interesting.
my
I didn't know what, you know.
job it makes my job easier when people do see that reality, that it's not, well, I got this ring neck and it won't do anything. Can you help me train it to do tricks? Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I can. But how about the really cool behaviors that you might be able to get it to offer? So yeah. What do you think? Was that lady chatting?
Yeah, I was like talking to you.
So, words of wisdom for people out there, Zeb, as far as bird ownership or aviculture overall. Let's go with that. Let's go with the big
Mm,
picture.
okay. Big picture. You don't know what you don't know. So one of my pet peeves is when people head on over to social media and they just openly ask, "What should I know?" Well, the person giving you that response, you don't know who they are, what their experience is, right? So I wish people would start with more legitimate sources, even though they're not perfect. I always say start with a book, something that's published, something somebody had to go through some trouble to put out there. So just don't follow people blindly. Um, Consider your options, question everything. And another big one, too, and yes, myself sir, included. Oh, computer's talking to me. Uh, Follow the money. I the internet will show you the most common question. It'll also show you results that are there to generate income, and there's nothing wrong with that. Profit's not a dirty word. But if somebody's saying never feed this, never do this, and by the way, I sell something that fixes that, take that with a grain of salt and do a little research. Ask around. Don't use one source and think critically.
Mhm. I like it. That's my favorite, is the use a lot of sources. Go to a lot of different sources, because it happens a lot, like creating toys, for things that are toxic. People always ask me, do you have a good source of a list of toxic woods? Well, I can pull up 10 and they'll all have different things on them, And so I always tell people, get a bunch of sources, compare and contrast where they overlap. Like, you make a Venn diagram, where the circles overlap, that's where your decent information is. Not necessarily your good information, but your decent information. And
Sure.
always question, always do what works for you. And in my opinion, don't ever let anyone shame you for something that is working for you, is safe for your birds, works in your house. So, um,
Yeah.
I think that's so important. But I want to thank you, Zeb. This has been great. Uh, I've really enjoyed the chat. Yeah, Ashley says bird experts are still learning every day, let alone bird owners, and it's so true. And if you're not, you're kind of done. So I really do appreciate it, and you guys should follow Zeb. Zeb, what's your Zeb Ernest on Facebook, and what do you go by on Instagram and TikTok?
Blue Planet Pets anywhere else except for Facebook. I do have a page on Facebook that's Blue Planet Pets, but to be honest with you, I haven't kept it up. I just do everything off my personal page, which is Zeb Ernest.
Hey, awesome. Just to recap, I know that uh, Adrian mentioned in the comments that there is a fundraiser going on currently for the Exotic Bird Hospital in Florida. So if you scroll through the comments, there's a link there in case you want to help out with that. There's a horrible fire, and they're really in need of some assistance. So if you guys want to go through the comments, they are there. I want to tell you, we are doing a session next week. We've been doing them every other, but we're doing one next week. And I know Chris Dooley was on this week, and we're going to talk about keeping a low profile on social media, that protecting your profile. So Chris has been on with me before. Yes, the opposite of that. So we want to because it's been so many scammers and lifting of profiles, and I had somebody try to sell me Leather Elves toys last week. That was kind of fun. Messed with that person for about a half an hour one morning. To great toys they had, so yeah, so you've got to be careful who you're dealing with, and just like I said before, just deal with Zeb and the Leather Elves. That's good. But so Chris will be here next week. And don't forget, we're having a sale. Chris just told me to say, or just put in the comments, lock down your page, Zeb. So just FYI. The but we're having a sale. We're having the Beat the Heat sale, 40% off until midnight, August 1st, and the code is HOT, HOT. So stay cool, Zeb. Thank you very much. And we will see you around social media. Have a great week, everybody. Take care. Bye bye.